Before I start this recording, I will say this. This is not going to be edited. I'm kind of just going on some of the stuff that I had written. Uh, I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. This will be I think, a three-part series at the most. This is going to be the first part. And my beginning disclaimer for all of them at this point will be that this has not been thoroughly discussed. And if you subscribe to the man-made history written, then this is not for you in any way, shape, or form. Most of what you'll hear is based on my own research and a bit of theory, as most of history is not a fact, so take what you will, leave what you will. But I can guarantee you haven't heard this elsewhere, and definitely not in this way. As not to again regurgitate the story of the Anunnaki, I will just jump right into what this series is about. Not just our misunderstanding of the stories of those who fell from heaven, but the true sex better explained as the Anunnaki being women as opposed to men. Yes, I would like to bring this well known story into one that might explain a little better some of the misconceptions, like how do human women have giants? The true reason that women till this day are suppressed. Why there is no known story of an uprising concerning men of those days not standing up, or no written testimony of men in those days being upset with their women being taken as wives and mating with the women of their family lines. How the one God of those times did not warn or intervene in this so-called hybridization of his creation. And by all means, don't mention the flood. That's after the fact. What would cause the suppression and utter contempt of women throughout history, even as many stories that are currently suppressed or misrepresented showing women as gods still not taken seriously? What has caused the oldest part of our brains to be generationally upset with women and subconsciously causing men till this day to mistreat, demean, and suppress women? Could it be because the hybridization of the human race was by women, and one of the true secrets is that men were in fact the ones that caused the human fall? There are many people out there in some major religions that quietly still worship women as goddesses and gods, and take seriously their importance in the world. How women can do things that men cannot, such as bleed for 7 days and not die, bear children, and feed those same children and produce nutrients for said child. Throughout history, there have been known instances where, even in the most brutal of times, men have tried to mimic what women can do. Even during the time of the Aztecs, men would cut themselves right underneath their scrotums to mimic women's menstruations. They usually died, but they thought that God had personally blessed women with this gift of remaining alive while cleansing through one of their most sacred rituals, which was bloodletting, which again they did do, but it was kind of called murder after that. In almost all ancient depictions of strange beings, there are women. We don't talk about that as often, as of course we're just looking at the beings that look different than humans, but there's a reason that we ignore the women, and we'll cover that later. Now, one of the largest debates are, how are they giants? Did they mean giants in a literal sense? And if so, how could a woman have a child that would eventually grow to the size of a giant? First, let's say there is no way to tell if there were giants walking the earth. Yes, I'm sure, as myself and many of you have seen, photos of giants being on Earth, and we all know that the large majority are photoshopped. But let's stay with it being more possible than not. Besides me telling you the natural answer as how the hell do you think a woman would have a child that would be a giant, I will go with medically, theoretically, and hypothetically, there's no way that a regular human woman, even in those times, could have had a child that would eventually grow up to be 20 feet tall. If you want to refer to the entire team of the Harlem Globetrotters as proof, that's simply on you. But who is to say that those who had children with humans had to be men impregnating women and not women impregnated by men in order to have hybridized children that we are so fond of believing in? Now, I bring this up. As far as we know, we cannot easily identify a possible hybrid of the Anunnaki, even if we go to the bloodlines. That is simply because those are tainted in the worst way. It's full of crap and cannot be trusted. But what can be trusted is genetics and abilities that many, even those who are not aware, have, and we live amongst them. We have different names for those that are different, and yes, some of them are charlatans. But there are people out there that have true abilities, some that can be explained and some that can't. Even those who believe in it strongly can be considered people that have forgotten their true ability, but by opening their minds, even if they never see it, they participate in its growth. Psychics, empaths, and the like have an ability that much of the population does not, and that can qualify them for possible hybrids. Of course, excluding those who are full of shit. Then we have the even less talked about, but one that has a more complicated explanation and something that cannot be faked, and that is those who are Rh negative blood types. Now, if you haven't heard of them, look it up. They have almost all of the abilities described above combined. This is the only one that is considered the universal blood type, and they can give blood to any other type on Earth, but cannot get blood from others or they die. Women are also considered hybrids, as unless intervening medicines such as Rogan, women that are pregnant with children that are not Rh negatives, their bodies will think of them as intrusive and harmful, and their bodies will abort the fetus. Without the use of Rogan, the rate of children being born would be very different. Yet we have made an entire fictional bloodline called the Blue Bloods due to this. Many women of the royal bloodlines would have stillborn children, and many attributed this to hybrid bloodlines. But this was not mainly because of the Rh negative factor, but because of the incestuous nature of those particular bloodlines. For those who wish to debate what I just said, I came to this conclusion after realizing that there was only 15% of the entire population of the planet that have Rh negative blood. That number has remained steady. Not only that, but the blood type has no repetitive nature to truly pinpoint where it started or where it goes. That means we never know who will be the next Rh negative. Sometimes they could be a family of 50 and only two have the blood type. Those numbers are far too small and way too inconsistent to be able to be traced or even truly counted within a so called real bloodline. Also, Rh negative blood types cannot be synthesized. All other blood types have an alternative blood source that has been genetically made and can be used successfully and is used in most hospitals around the world. But the one blood type that can be used for anyone but cannot be remade in a lab, not to say that science hasn't tried, but they haven't been successful, is Rh negative. Now let's go to the suppression of women. The suppression of women was not always the norm, and it can easily be said that it hasn't been debated that much either. Sure, I can throw in the stories of how in 2015 some countries women can't drive or be in higher religious positions, and I can go on and on. But I'm talking about other things that are not discussed and should be, like genital mutilation, and why that's still a thing. What's it for, and what the hell are men afraid of? But I have to make sure to say that this is not the reality of the world, and here's where you begin to see the matrix of the world you truly live in. Something we don't really talk about is the influence of women in the world. Not only are we the mothers, but also some might consider the other part of the masculine, which of course is the feminine. Very rarely do women get a bad rap. And of course, I don't mean by the guys who claim they buy too many shoes or they're all about money. But they are the sole child rearers of some of the most brutal men on earth, from Genghis Khan to Hitler. Everyone that has committed atrocities on this planet had a mother, and even during times that we seem to revel in today, boys would have become men with their fathers, but their most important years were with their mothers first. Throughout history, and even in more recent times, women are not associated with crime, mayhem, and murder. Not because they're not human and they don't have human emotions and thoughts, but because we're taught that women cannot be that way, that it's not encoded in the DNA and they simply don't have the ability. The way that we throw the word Illuminati around, and how women like Madonna, Rihanna, Beyonce are said to be part of a cabal that they were tricked into being in, and are mind controlled slaves is in fact false. And I think that it's stupid to think that women are not in control of what they do, especially those who we for some reason think are so dumb that they are willingly part of a massive cover up to dumb down society. The feminine and the masculine are in fact given names to confuse. Masculine doesn't mean man, it means strength and aggressiveness, and feminine is defined as delicacy and prettiness. Do either of those definitively describe a man and a woman? Nope. Simple misuse of two words has changed our society as a whole. By us getting indoctrinated on those two words, we in our subconscious associate strength and aggressiveness in men only, and delicateness and prettiness in women. That is why when we see a case of a woman killing her children, she gets a few years in prison, and a man being delicate and pretty in another country gets him killed. It's even gotten so out of hand that we have a larger issue with the mistreatment of races and not the sexes, so that it's ignored. But this, my friends, is how we have got this far. And if you stuck with me this far, we're going to go even further. How is it that every story, movie, etc., and more show men doing their duty as the aggressors, yet it's the women who speak to them in the bedroom? Do you think that the nature of sex between the sexes is new? Nope. And it's why I believe that the Anunnaki were in fact women and not men, and how our brains are known to be generational, as through generations of family, tribes, and cultures, we have a certain mindset. We know the capability of men, And if we relook at the story of how the Anunnaki began here, look at it through the eyes of men seeing beautiful women, teaching the art of war, weapons, and even makeup. How this would have affected the men of those days, as it does for men today. We twisted the theory of women looking for the more aggressive type of man, a bad boy, if you will. But what if I told you it's the woman that is the bad girl and the attraction is to a man who could handle a woman like that? As the nice guy gets passed by, it's solely because they cannot deal or appreciate with the tough interior of a more aggressive woman. This would also explain how feminine men have become for the past few generations, and this is no longer needed and or internalized as it once was. This again is not a mistake or accidental. There's no need for it. There is no way that this is coincidental that women and men have changed their natures in just 20 years or so. The real trick was holding down the impression that women were weak, vulnerable, and damsels in distress, when in fact they were lying in wait for the right moment. And that moment is now. It's not to turn all men into women, but it's the term masculine has run its course as far as women are concerned. The masculine being used to be brutal force, war, and crimes against humanity. That's no longer needed. The time for the feminine is now. We need to heal what has been taken for granted and suppressed. And that was the feminine that was and always has been needed, as the light and the dark are needed for a really successful society. By removing the aggressive nature from women as a whole, we open the possibility of eventually being run by them. This isn't a bad thing, of course, but keep in mind there are mental differences between men and women and the overall knowing of the amount of aggression and callousness that they indeed have. The game can change overnight. Just imagine if we are still overwhelmed with religion and race division. What do you think will happen when women can rise up and state that their oppression and their oppressors have been in place since the beginning of time? What do you think they would want to change first? The confusion and regression of how and what women mean to society has been misused and caused much of what's going on today. As men showed that they were the kings of the castles and took to not connecting with their other half, which is wives and mothers, aunts and grandmothers. Women began raising their children differently with a more feminine nature, as men thought that their force would keep things in check. It has actually caused decades of overprotective child rearing and domineering women, who, if treated as an equal, would not be as we are today. There was a constant disconnect with children growing up with stories and religion demonizing women. How do we not think that there would be some backlash to that? If we removed words woman and man and changed it to masculine and feminine for both sexes, our world would be drastically different. If we are constantly surrounded by a patriarchal society and there is nothing but change needed, then we are in fact on the right path. If and when we decide that women play a huge role, then things will remain the same. We are concerned with the planet and its actions, but even as the answer stands before us, we choose to look the other way. There's no possible way that women were left out of the equation by accident. Why would this remain suppressed for so long unless there was something missing from the story? Can this change? Will it change? Hell if I know. But if it does, it will be not be in my lifetime, but I will be damned if I will not take that time while I'm on this earth and try to share some of this information. We need to discuss these things. I am a parent and I have sons and daughters, and there has never been a moment where I taught one or the other differently on what they bring to the table. But by me understanding what is happening, I was able to give them a hell of a head start on what women and what men mean to one another in order to work for a better world. When I say world, I don't mean as a whole, I mean as a unit or one another. A family. It doesn't matter your sexual orientation as most think. We have tainted the words men and women that who the hell knows when we realize that even those who are same sex have had their minds tainted in a world that chooses to divide us. No one is immune. So love who you want and be sure that you become part of the solution and not part of the problem. Thank you. This is my first part. I'm going to be getting into a lot more detail later on in the week. And thank you for listening. This is Trinity, your host for Esoteric Truth Radio.